Go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone so much for joining. My name is Danielle Coe. I'm the CEO and founder of Black Women in Clinical Research, Black Men in Clinical Research, and Minorities in Clinical Research. The mission is to educate, empower, support, and help Black men, Black women, and minorities thrive in the clinical research industry. Tonight, we are here for Cognacs and Conversation. We have Lewis Johnson, who is presenting. Thank you so much, Lewis. If you would like to give a little introduction and mute.
All right, can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, I appreciate the warm welcome, Danielle. To everybody who may or may not know me, my name is Lewis Johnson. As she said, I'm based out of the Chicago area, and I've been in pharmaceuticals for quite some time. And I started off in clinical, in sales, and then into research. And Danielle and I were just talking a little bit ago, and I said that I was very proud of her for putting all of this together, because this is something I thought about actually about 10 years ago, but never had the I guess the ability to pull it through and pull it off, and to see her do this and have everybody join in and see what's going on. It's very exciting for me because I think all of us have gone to investigator meetings or sites or something, and it's just us. And so to see an organization like this is fantastic. So tonight, I just want to give a little bit of information about my career, an overview of how I got started and got into the industry, and then highlight a few of the things that that I find are key and critical for us as we traverse this clinical research space as we navigate through the pandemic and then go on through. And then we can hopefully take some of this information and reach back and help other people. Okay. Right. One moment. So I'm going to provide you a little information on my background, my time in the industry. And then as I focus on clinical research, the 4 things that I thought were critical were comparing the CRO and sponsor experience, contracting, because a lot of us have thought about it or tried it and are uncertain about it. So I wanted to kind of discuss that a little bit. And then there's the software and CTMS element of it. I did some work in that realm, and we use these tools and platforms quite often, but I wanted to discuss what it looks like as it pertains to our overall exposure into research. And then lastly, diversity and inclusion, which brings us here tonight. And at the end or throughout, feel free to ask me questions, interject. I want to make this as interactive as possible. Most of us worked all day, and I want to make sure that this is as enjoyable as it can possibly be. Background-wise, I told you that I am from the Chicago area, and I left here to go to college at Hampton University with the intentions of becoming a doctor. And I think a lot of us left high school wanting to go into medicine, and for whatever reason, the pathway got turned around and we ended up doing some other things. And I wanted to highlight Hampton because it was a place, one of the first places that I saw a lot of PhDs and scientists and other brilliant people that looked like me. They talked like me and they lived like me. And quite honestly, I can remember some of the professors I had reminded me of my mom. And so when I think of my mom, it's my mom, but the professor, she's a PhD talking about chemistry or science or biology or zoology, whatever the case may be. And Hampton left an indelible impression on me. And I can honestly say that I walked the campus with a lot of brilliant people and rubbed elbows with those people. And I admire a lot of those people. And I can say that that school helped make me who I am. And I know some of us, hopefully, if you spend a lot of money at a college, you will love your school as much as I love mine. Mine just happens to be Hampton. And some of us here went to HBCUs, so hello. And then I worked on my doctorate in health. Pardon? Oh. All right. Then I worked on my doctorate in health administration at A.T. Still University in Missouri. And I have an asterisk by that. I completed all of my coursework in about 3/4 of the dissertation, and I ran out of time. I asked them for an extension, and they said no. This was at the beginning of the pandemic. And so we had the pandemic. My daughter got hit by a car, and my mother was going into the hospital for pancreatic cancer and getting her pancreas removed. And I explained all of that to them and asked for the extension, and they still said no. So I go back to Hampton. If that same scenario happened at Hampton, they probably would have given me the old HBCU runaround, but as a person, they would have let me finish my program. So just as a shout out to why there is a need for HBCUs, and specifically Hampton, my home by the sea. So I'm gonna move on, but I love Hampton. So after I got out of college and went to grad school at Hampton, I came back home and did not have a plan B. My plan A was to go to UT Memphis and get a PhD in whatever it was. And they said no and didn't let me into the program. And so I had no plan B. So I came home for a while and was working temp jobs. And I even worked for a little while as a mortgage loan officer, which my father is still upset with me about because I wasted a lot of time doing it. But then after doing a lot of that for about a year, I got a call from a recruiter who matched me up with a pharmaceutical sales opportunity. And I got the job on Mother's Day of 1999. So I started working for this company that at the time was called Snyder Healthcare Sales. So for those of you who might be from DC metro area, Snyder Healthcare Sales at the time was owned by Daniel Snyder, who owns the Washington football team. Okay. He and his sister owned this company, and it later became what we now know as Ventive. And back then they also called it Ventive Health US Sales. So I sold in a contract capacity for in the areas of arthritis, GI, diabetes, cardiovascular, and in cholesterol. I sold statin meds. But two things that I thought were really critical for that experience is that I learned where this data comes from or how it's used. So you take the data from clinical trials and it gets written up in the reports, and that's the data that they also have on the package inserts and the medications and on the marketing materials. So then I take that data and then we go into this offices and do our sales details. So in a commercial sense, that's what we see on TV when they say X% had a decrease in their LDLs or had an increase in HDLs or, you know, stopping the reflux in GI if it's Nexium or something like that. So that data goes into use by the sales reps. Then I got laid off, which was a very troublesome time for me because I was out of work for about 4 months. But I had a cousin at the time who was a CRA at this company in Nashville called Icon Clinical Research. And he says, Lewis, this is what I do. You go to doctor's offices, I go to doctor's offices. You talk about this, I talk about this. Here's what I want you to do. Send me your CV. I will help you edit your CV. But in the meantime, go to centerwatch.com and memorize all of the stuff I tell you to memorize. I memorized it all, took my CV, he forwarded it around, and I got my interviews here at the in Deerfield, Illinois, at the Icon office that we had near Chicago. I went in there, interviewed, recited all of the stuff that he told me to memorize, killed the interview, walked out, got to the car, and forgot everything that I had just talked about. About a few days later, they called me and said, hey, we want to hire you as an entry-level CRA. But since you have a master's degree, we're not going to have you be entry level. We're going to have you be, I guess, a CRA 1, because back then it was entry level, CRA 1, 2, senior, and principal. So that's how I got into clinical research. And that starts the next set of bullets where I worked for 19 years thus far, working for CROs. I worked for sponsors, I worked for vendors. I've been in contract and consulting positions. And I even, for a brief period of time, owned a research clinic in Indianapolis. It lasted 3 years. Unfortunately, I had a few partners that didn't see eye to eye with my vision, and the business unfortunately did not survive. But it was a great experience nonetheless. And I still use the skills that I developed in all of these positions to this day. So now I just want to break in and discuss a few things on those 4 particular topics that I mentioned in the little outline. So my CRO and sponsor experience. The one thing that I wanted to highlight is that you have small and large organizations, and then you have company culture. And I believe that those kind of things go hand in hand. So when I'm ever interviewing or talking to people about small versus large, I like to take it away from work and go back to college. And you might have two schools. Let's call it the University of Illinois or University of Michigan, and you have a gigantic campus with 50,000 students, Ohio State, something like that. Then you have Hampton or Howard that might have 5,000 to 10,000 people. Where do you feel most comfortable? Where do you feel like you have your best place? And I think that when you look at how you navigate on the campus with your colleagues and do things, where you feel most comfortable is where you will be most effective and learn the most. And I think that at work, it's very similar. Some people relish the idea of going to a large company like IQVIA, and they will excel and do well. Some of us want to wear multiple hats, and we prefer to be in a smaller environment. And I think it's important to look at what fits you and your style. And that goes into the company culture. Some company cultures are very stoic and tight, to say the least, and they want you to do what they want you to do and really don't want any additional contribution depending on your level on the totem pole where you are. And what I've observed in this company culture thing is you might have a lot of politics, which all companies do. But if you're in a position where people can look beyond politics and look at who you are for what you have and what you can present, then you will be in a greater position to be successful for yourself. And I say all that to say, take a look at that as you may be looking for different jobs. Because some of us, and I have a friend of mine that's popping into my mind, he's not in research, but he finds it absolutely valuable to always work for a company that runs commercials on TV, that have big names like blue chip companies like Allstate or CVS or Walmart or Walgreens, companies that if you say the name, then you know it. And so when he hands you his business card, he wants to feel proud about the company he's working for. But they crap on this guy. They're such a blue chip, old line, hard-nosed companies that they don't care about what he's thinking. And he's a very nice, generous guy, but they want him to be cutthroat. And so sometimes you need to look at the company, not for its name, but for what you can contribute, what they can contribute to you, and where your values lie. Because if we're all, let's call it 50 and under, or however old people are, you got a lot of years to work. And in a perfect world, you want to be able to give what you can and then share what you have. And some companies allow it and some companies don't. And so I wanted to really hit on that piece. I see the chat thing is blowing up. Good night. Oh, preach. Thanks, Danielle. All right. I'm doing okay. All right. The next piece is contracting. Now, I wanted to contract for a while when I was doing this, and it was very, very difficult for me to get into. And I was tussling between quitting a permanent job that I had at i3 Research and then doing it. I was a lead CRA at the time, and I was managing a bunch of CRAs who were contractors, and they kept demonstrating to me what it was, what you could do, how much money you could make and how challenging it was to get everything started. But I didn't have the guts to do it until I got laid off. I was going to this small city in central Washington called Wenatchee. So I had to fly out from Chicago to Seattle Tacoma Airport. I was on a layover waiting to go to Wenatchee, Washington. And then the director of ClinOps called me and said, hey, Louis, we're having layoffs, 300 of them. And by the way, you're one of them. So please turn back around and go back to Chicago. Okay. So I was about to freak out, but I called my buddy who walked me through all of the steps that he took to get ready to do a contract, and helped me redo my CV, helped me to do my references and everything I needed to do while I was waiting on this flight to go home. So then within a day, I had a couple of interviews. By the end of that week, I had landed a position through Aerotech to contract with Quintiles for a project with Genentech. And that essentially changed everything that I knew about research up to that point. Because what that taught me is that, because before that, I had only worked for big CROs and I worked in these mainstream therapeutic areas. But when I started off contracting, I was able to learn about different sizes of companies, different projects, different types of angles on research, and it really taught me a lot. So that's where I developed these pros and cons. One is you get to run your own business. And even though you might be contracting as a monitor or a lead or a PM or whatever your position might be, it's still your business and you need to think of it that way. Quite frankly, when you're working for a permanent position, you should think of it as your job or your company. I work for Lewis Incorporated, and Lewis Incorporated deserves to get paid every other week or whatever it is, contract or otherwise. And if you do it like that and think like that, you might be able to work like that. And so, and in a contract capacity, I had multiple contract opportunities. This one brother that I met at an investigator meeting said, if you contract and you do not work 100%, and you say get a 65 or 75% commitment, then you always have the first right of refusal. You can refuse other projects. You can refuse travel because they know you have other stuff to do. You cannot answer your phone because they know that you're not 100% dedicated to their project. So he also said you can take a 65% contract, work that time, get another contract for a smaller percentage, and make one a W-2 with one a 1099, and you can juggle around the insurance and retirement and all these other different things. And that is how you do your business. The other thing is you are then insulated somewhat from the politics at a company. You know, so you have to go to your team meetings and listen and do everything that you're supposed to do. But one thing about this is they don't want to hear you talk other than about study activity or CRA activity, sites, etc. But to volunteer to do something that is unrelated to your sites, they don't want to hear it because they're not going to pay you for it. And that's cool. So you don't have to raise your hand if you don't want to. And you don't have to worry about somebody saying, hey, why didn't he raise his hand? Because they know why you didn't raise your hand. And then because they're going to have to pay you to raise your hand. Okay. Cons: when the contract ends, it's over. Just like they don't want you to raise your hand, they don't want you there anymore if the contract ends. And you have to be okay with that. A recruiter once told me that if you think of a contract like you're an actor, some actors get to be on Friends for 20 years or whatever TV show for a long time. Then some people only get to do the pilot. You do it once and then you're out. The pilot didn't get picked up. Sometimes you do a commercial, sometimes you do a movie. So it's like you have different sizes of contracts that bring you different money and they last for different durations. But if you don't have the stomach for ending a project, you have to think about not being a contractor. And everybody's risk tolerance is different. Tax prep: you have your W-2s, which most of us work as a permanent employee, and then you have your 1099. The 1099, you have to do your own taxes. And if you're not meticulous enough to do it, maybe you should be a permanent employee. But you can always get an accountant. you might be pretty awesome at TurboTax, but TurboTax for your little 1040 EZ is not the same thing as multiple contracts and multiple money, so streams of income coming in, all right? So you have to take care of that. And then you have varying pay cycles. This is something that a lot of people don't know about until they get on a contract where they say, okay, we're only going to pay you once a month. Or they have a system where they called it a net 45 for me, where I might monitor the entire month of January. I submit my invoice for my time and my travel expenses on January 30th. They process it in the middle of February, and I might not get my pay from January to the end of March, okay? You have to budget for that. You have to adjust your credit card payments for that. And that's something that was tough for me. And you get these gigantic 5-figure checks because you have a month's worth of expenses and a month's worth of hours invoiced, but you have to ultimately be responsible for your money. And if you're not willing to do that, then maybe you should hang on to your permanent gigs for a minute. But I wanted to highlight that because those are some very important pieces to this industry. The other pro that I think I left off of here is the idea of this, and something that people should consider is that a lot of times you have the opportunity to work for small biotechs, small CROs, or other small pharma companies that might be, 35, 40, 50 people or fewer, and you have the ability to work with them. And quintiles, quite honestly, and PPD, they're too big to do some of the studies that these other folks are working on. Some of these early phase 2 small compounds, they need people to come in, do the work, and then maybe re-sign a contract later, but not be a permanent employee. And that's where you get exposed to various types of cutting edge activity and cutting edge futuristic products that aren't coming out yet, that will not be on TV for a while on a commercial or anything. So if you are intellectually curious about what's coming down the pipe, contracting can help you in that regard. All right. Before I get started on this next piece, does anybody have any questions? And if so, please shout out. Okay. All right. Okay, so we have, my next item is research software and platforms. So for a short period of time, I worked for Medidata in their CTMS enablement group. And our role was to help guide sponsors and CROs through their enablements for their studies. We had 2 different types of CTMS platforms. One is the older classic, they call it, and the new one is called platform. And they have these different offerings. And as we've all used these platforms, we've seen how there are different aspects of it that work and some of them don't work, or they'll say, oh, we're only using this for this period, for this portion of the CTMS or RAVE or whatever the system is. And what I learned from that is, on the other side of it, on the software development and platform development side, we were presenting to them everything that these companies might want. And then from there, they get to select what they need. And sometimes what they need is based on what they can afford. And so things, it takes money and takes time. It takes selection. And so what I learned is that you get to see from a different side of the table, people putting together a clinical study. Most of us really just focus on the protocol, but they're focusing on how do you collect what you need based on the protocol and how it's housed. So then the other thing that I think is great to discuss with this is you get to see how research is changing, because many data had a lot of different programs ongoing, and they were in constant discussion with different companies, different vendors, different pharma companies on trying to figure out ways to advance clinical trials, how to advance data collection and use this data once it has been collected. So I think that it is extremely important to know that everything that we do in this industry has its place, including the software people. Now, when I was working with them, sometimes the software people didn't really know what we did on the other side. They just know, okay, there's a CRO with CRAs, and they're collecting data in the EDC, and they do queries and run reports, and that's pretty much it. But when you guys know as well as I do that as we look at these studies, this data is critical. And so it's critical that the data is also housed in a good place. And there are a lot of companies that are doing this, and it's quite interesting. But one thing that I just as a future of tech and research piece that I think is key is that, you know, several years ago, one of my cousins came up with this idea for telemedicine. And it wasn't necessarily his idea, but he had a company that he created where you could plug into the USB on your laptop a blood pressure cuff or a pulse ox reader or something, and then you could interface with the physician just like I'm working with you right now. So he had me do the beta testing and all this, and nobody would pick up his ideas. He tried to do these big, he tried to have these big programs with the city of Chicago and other hospitals, and nobody would buy into it. And this is probably like 2009, 2010. Then here comes the pandemic, and everything that this guy was doing is what everybody's using, or some version of it. And you best believe that there are a lot of companies out there trying to create new products because people don't want to go into hospitals. They don't want to go to do regular routine visits. They don't want to have, companies are realizing how much money they're saving by not sending CRAs all around the world or having gigantic investigator meetings anymore. So the world is changing right before our eyes. So my advice to everybody is to take a look at what's coming down the pike and kind of look several steps ahead and see how you can fit in to this new world of clinical trials. Because I hate to say how old I am, but back when I started, data was collected on paper. Wi-Fi wasn't even a real word. You had to plug your computer in the wall to use it, and you only used it for email. That's how long I've been doing this. So to watch it go from paper to you can be on the phone and record diaries and stuff like that, that's amazing. But now we have small phones, wearable technologies, and all these different things that are going to be the future of medicine and research, in fact. So keep that in mind. And as you look for your studies in a fun kind of way, look for a company that might be doing something like that. I'm not telling you to quit where you work now, but those kinds of studies have to be conducted as well. Any questions? All right. And my last big piece is diversity and inclusion. And I think we've all had a chance to kind of see that in any field, representation is needed at all levels. And I really think that that's critical in research. So we need to have a broad cross-section of our society as patients, study subjects. We need to have a diverse monitoring team and clinical operations team. Then we need to have managers that are diverse. And then up top, at the tops of the CROs and the tops of the sponsors, we need to have diversity, because if you don't have people thinking about these different things, then you're not going to recruit the right people. And the right people are not recruited, both doctors and patients, then we're not going to get the accurate data that we should. A few years ago, I worked on a rare disease dermatology study that showed where when you do this, the background on this particular disease, it was a genetic anomaly that was rooted in some, I think, a North African nation. And not one time did the sponsor even try to open up a site in that nation, nor did they try to look around the world to see if there were people of that demographic in various cities around the world so that they can open up a site in those cities to recruit that demographic. They even had a site in Florida with, and we were setting up the study, and we asked them, do you want these ICFs to be translated into Spanish? And they said, no, we don't. They didn't want to spend the money. But then when you look at the roster of the investigator, the study coordinator, and all of the people who they were recruiting, they had Spanish surnames. And so what we needed was somebody with a diverse background and some diverse thinking to help set up that study. They certainly wouldn't listen to me. But if there was somebody in higher level management that could say, we've used this site before, most of their population is Puerto Rican and Cuban, maybe we should get this in Spanish. And then they had to retroactively translate all these documents. But diversity up top would have solved that problem before it even became a problem. And I think that that's something that's big. The next piece of that is, when I say diversity, it's not just about blacks and whites and the easy ethnic demographic things. It's known that in many cases, we don't have enough studies that involve women as patients, women as, there's a lot of monitors, but at the higher levels of research, there's a lot of females that are project managers, but not enough at the tip top. And those tip top decisions trickle down to our studies. So that has to be the case. Like the study coordinator years ago told me that a lot of cardiovascular studies are mostly done on men. So when you look at a cardiovascular drug, and they have the recommended dosages, those are based on the results from studies predominantly with male subjects. That's not good medicine. Because listen, a man in that study might be 6'2", 200 pounds. My mother is 4'11" and 108. So should she take the same thing as the big guy? Probably not. But on the bottle, it'll say, take 2 of these and then call a guy in the morning. And that's not how we should be letting medicine go. Last piece on the drug piece, on diversity. COVID showed that we have a lot of inequities in medicine. We have a lot of inequities in our delivery of medicine, evaluation of medicine, how patients are diagnosed. And it's very important that we, the people who are part of this, the stakeholders in this, both as patients and as workers in this industry, that we do our best to expose that, not necessarily in a kneel down Kaepernick way where you lose your job. I'm just saying we have to acknowledge that it is an issue and do what we can within our respective lanes to make sure that we do what we can. Because again, if we don't have the right people doing the right, getting the right subjects, then we're not truly getting good data. The last piece I wanted to say about this is this third bullet, and it's the importance of networking organizations like this. I'm very, very, very proud of Danielle for what she's put together. And you know, when Vincent got on the call, think that's your name, brother. I'm sorry if I messed it up. And yes, Vince and Lil John. When she acknowledged your new job, that's what we should be doing for each other. And that is a very good thing. And I'm very proud of you for what you did. And in all transparency, when I spoke, Danielle and I had been emailing back and forth for a few months, but never had a chance to talk. She called me, or we agreed to talk about 2 weeks ago. And I had had one of the worst days of my career at work that same day. But then she asked me to come speak to this group. And that really excited me, because before I talked to Danielle, I felt like I wasn't wanted, like I wasn't needed. And I felt disrespected at work. However, getting asked to come here and then prepping for this reminded me who I am and what I'm about and what we collectively are about. And I have a lot of good things to share up here, and I'm very happy that she let me go. Last thing is they have that saying that says, all your skin folk ain't your kinfolk. Don't be a part of that. Don't be the bad kinfolk. Help your kinfolk. You know, you can't help everybody. But if you are at work and you hear through the grapevine that some bad stuff might be coming on to one of your colleagues, tell them. Call them on the cell phone. Send them an IM on WhatsApp, or do something to give them a heads up. Don't let your colleague just languish like that. Don't act like they're a leper and you can't speak to them or reach out and give them a hand, because in return, you're going to want a hand one day too. You're going to be in one of these meetings where it's you and then everybody else, and you might be the token, and you're going to need some assistance and guidance and help. And you might be saying, well, why didn't they help me? Well, turnabout is fair play, and you don't want that to be the case. And so I really feel like groups like these remind us of times like these, so we can give advice like this. So with that, I open the floor for questions. I thank everybody for having me. And if I missed something, I apologize. We will schedule another one tomorrow. I can talk all.
That was great, Lewis. Everyone said in the comments that you were dropping the gems, and this is a great talk. You know, I think a lot of times we don't have someone to give us that honest and sound advice and let us know, you know, everyone is going through trials and tribulations, but it's not about, it's not about what you go through, but how you come out on top. So I'm glad I was able to speak to you on, you said, the worst days of your career, and lifted your spirits. And it definitely, I know that we need this, especially for the men and especially for everyone. This information is valuable to everyone that's willing and ready to listen.
Well, I appreciate that. And I must say, there's a guy who's one of my mentors here in Chicago. We worked together at Icon years ago, and this guy always reaches out to me to give me advice. And he ended up leaving clinical research and going on to becoming a med science liaison. And so he's a few years older than me, so he's always like treat me like a big little brother. And so I think that in that spirit, that's kind of what I wanted to do here. And I'm excited to continue to be a part of this organization and this group, so we can do some big things, because there's a lot of stuff going on in this world, and I believe that we have the capacity to be a part of it.
So we have a question from my fiance. He asks, what advice would you have for individuals interested in the sales side of clinical research, or pharma sales more accurately?
I think that one thing, and let me take a step back. When I was getting into sales, one of my other cousins was helping me do that. And she's been in sales for 100 years. She's a few years older than me. And so she was helping me do that. And one of the things that she told me to do was to create a brag book. So if you work at any job in a sales capacity, save all of your records that show what you sold, what your month over month increases were, or what your bonuses might be, anything that can show your trajectory of success. And that's regardless of research, clinical, pharma. I mean, it could be selling cars. You save your sales records to show everybody what you can do. Because if you want to go into a business and say, trust me, Mr. Man, I can sell. Believe me, I can. They're going to tell you the hell out of here. So if you have a record and a brag book of what your successes are, it'll help you out. But in pharma, and I would also say in sales of like, let's call it business development for a CRO, you want to be able to discuss these same types of scientific topics, but in a very fluid and easy way, to let people know that you have the capacity to potentially, like in a teacherly kind of way, talk about your product, but then you're asking for business at the same time. And so I think that it's very good to do that. One thing in sales that I saw a lot of is a lot of the pharma salesmen were like former athletes, like quarterbacks, the Tom Brady chiseled jaw, leadership. You want to be assertive and show that you have this capacity for leadership, guidance, and being a self-starter. And I think you can take a lot of that into the pharma industry on the research side in business development, do the same thing.
Thank you. He said he loved the advice on keeping a record of your achievements.
But it's Jeremy, right?
Yes.
So I will say the same thing to everybody else on this call. Even though you might not be selling something, you should always record and maintain your achievements or perhaps your creations that you have, because you might take them to another company and need to replicate it. This could be a tool that you made, a SIV readiness tool, or a presentation you put together for an SIV or a training or something like that. You might be, instead of reinventing the wheel, you can take that stuff with you from job to job. And, or even if you see one that somebody else did at the old job, you can take it to the new job and they say, hey, Louis, have you ever done this? Well, actually I have. And we laugh. Yeah, I have done that, but I think it's good to keep a record of it. And if you're going on interviews, sometimes they ask you, well, do you have experience in hematology, or do you have experience in this or device or whatever the case may be? You want to be able to have a record of what you've worked on, because it's very easy to forget.
Yeah, because you have to think of it as you're branding yourself and that you're the brand. So I definitely agree. So we have a couple of more questions. Ashley asks, how much CRA experience do you think you should have before going contract?
That's a variable question, because I saw somebody do it with none. It just, I think you need to have at least 3 to 4 years, ideally, because you want to be able to be well-versed in a lot of the common situations that might occur, where you can run your own sites. I mean, so if you kind of think of yourself like at, I don't know how it is at Icon and PPD now, but there was a time when they had principal CRAs and you were pretty much running everything on small studies by yourself with very little oversight. And if you can imagine yourself working at that level of proficiency, that would be ideal, because you want to make sure that you do those things without having as much scrutiny. But I think it's always good to have maybe a mentor or somebody else alongside you who's done it for a while, so that you can kind of emulate what they're doing. And you don't, then if you have somebody like that, you can drop that 3-4 years down to 3 years, but you want to be able to also speak the jargon appropriately on the calls with the recruiters, because if you can't, they'll tell right away that you don't know anything about contracting. And so it's a challenge once you get there, or to get there, but once you do, I think it'll be good, you know. So by all means, we can share emails or something, and I can answer more questions about that.
Okay. And forgive me if I mispronounce your name. Laveza said, can you elaborate on winning contract bids?
Okay, so I'll speak on two aspects of contracts. One, they were when I was working as a CRA on some of those contracts, I would definitely go through agencies, and there's a million of them out there. One in particular that I used a lot was called monitorforhire.com. Monitorforhire.com. You upload your CV and details into the thing, and you kind of wait. It's kind of like those substitute teacher things. You fill out all the information, and then you wait in the morning, and they call you and say, hey, the gym class at the high school needs a teacher. Do you want press 1? No, press 2. It's very simple like that. And then they do a couple of interview calls, and then you guys work the rate together. And then there's other companies like Aerotech and gosh, I can't remember all the names, but there's some other companies out there that have outsourcing that they work with companies on all the time. So think about this, and I'm gonna go back to the contract thing for a second. If you go to like RTP or in Austin, Texas, or parts of New Jersey on Route 1, right, where Novo Nordisk and all those big companies are on Route 1 near Princeton. If you notice in the small office buildings, there are always little small companies you never heard of before. Or like in RTP, you drive through the office park in Morrisville by PPD. There's a lot of small offices for companies that cannot hire people permanently because they don't have the money to do it. So they'll work through another agency to secure to bring in CRA talent or manager talent. I mean, I've worked at companies where it was just like the CEO, CFO, a director, and then everybody else doing all the clin ops. We were all contractors. So you can get your projects that way. The other way is you can get referred in by a colleague who might be doing it. So you have them say, hey, I know a guy and he's in Chicago. He can cover the Midwestern stuff. And they say, what's his name? Oh, his name is Louis. Oh, hi, Louis. This is Jenny from whatever tech or whatever. And then they call, and then you negotiate a rate, and then you interview with a couple of people, and then you sign a non-compete or NDAs or whatever it is, and agree to terms. When I was contracting for other projects on the side, where I would sometimes I worked at sites helping them prep for FDA audits or remediation after the audit, or training on site. That's something that I did on my own. Like, so, I worked at a site once as a CRA, out of sight, out of mind. Then they called me and said, Louis, we have this problem. Are you able to come? Do you ever do consulting on the side? And I'm like, well, actually I do. Yes, I have a business. And then I start asking them what they need done. And then I kind of think about it and say, if it's not me, they're going to call some, huge company, and they're going to get billed to high heaven and may or may not get a good job, get a good job done for them. But I know how to review documents. I know how to train people. And so I put together some templates and things for myself and said, okay, this is what I can do. This is what I will do. And I kind of did some like invoicing to bill these people. And you don't overbill, you don't underbill, but you're going to get beat on those first couple of invoices because you're going to say, wow, this is taking me longer than I thought, and I underbilled myself. I under invoiced. However, you only need to do it one time because you're going to use that same material for another thing. Just like the creation of a source document template. You take the time to do it once, and then you Xerox it or whatever it is when it's time to send it to the sites. So getting those projects was a challenge. I created marketing materials. For a time, I had a website, which in my case was a waste of money because nobody ever looked at it. You could look at the hits and it'll say in like 6 or 8 months, I had like 5 hits and they were all mine, looking at the site to see if I had any hits. There were no hits. So it was a waste, but I would get referred to different sites by different people to do different things. And so like I said in the slide, it's like thinking like a business. A lot of us, when we're as monitors and we work for Quintiles or whoever it is, we're like, okay, I'm going to wait for them to tell me what new study to be on. Oh, it's a new study starting in 6 weeks. Okay, I can co-monitor until the 6 weeks. Well, when you're doing your own thing, you don't have time to co-monitor or wait. You have to get on it and be assertive and be aggressive. I don't know if you guys have ever heard the name Fred Eshelman. Fred Eshelman was a guy who created PPD. And he started PPD by being a monitor, and it was him and like one other person. And then PPD now is PPD. So all of these things that we're doing are the same things that everybody else is doing. And that's what they started out doing. And it's just a matter of being diligent and creative and having a plan. And you write your plan, stick to the plan, and then you're going to fall on your face, but you get back up and try to work the plan again and network in organizations like this. I hope that helped. I'm rambling. I get it. And I'm sorry. I just keep running. So
no, it did. Thank you very
fine.
much.
So we have another question from Ronson. What advice would you give someone who has loftier dreams, such as owning or operating a CRO?
Do it. Do it. And I would say, listen, man, I have thought about owning a CRO as well, and I've done a lot of research on it. And the fundamentals of it are somewhat easy. Then there's a lot of technical things that you have to do a lot of research on, as far as licensing and doing all these different things and FDA registrations and all that. And I still don't know all of that. So I would just say, do your due diligence on what it is, on what it is you want to do. The other thing that I will tell you that I've gradually started to learn truly in the last like 3-4 years is that there are some very small CROs out there. And those small CROs generally serve small sponsors, because again, a company that has a $3-4 million project, that's not enough money for PPD to even do the bid defense. Okay, so they're there, and you just have to know how to put your mind together. And I would say, if I had to give advice on who to secure, I would have to say get advice from any kind of medical affairs people, any kind of healthcare or research attorneys that you might come in contact with, and that might know how to navigate that business portion, have sources for funding, to have seed money, because you have to put in work and you have to pay people to do the work until you can be paid by the client. Oh, by the way, you got to go get a client. So you have to kind of look at some things to try to figure out how you'll do that. It's very easy to think of a CRO as only Icon, PPD, PRA, Syneos, LabCorp, or whatever, but they all started really little. And I think if you look at niche therapeutic areas, that's a good way to get something started. Oh, I even would say use your Google and Google stupid stuff like tiny CROs, small CROs, Black CROs, and you'll be amazed at what kind of stuff comes up.
Yeah, I know Pamela Nelson, Dr. Pamela Nelson has her own CRO, and she's a Black woman. We just recently did a meeting with her not too long ago with the nurses. So I'll definitely, like you said, connect with other people that have their own SMO, their own CRO. So you can just get an idea of how they do their day-to-day operations and how they were able to come up with their business plan so they could own their own company.
Yeah. Okay. I'm looking at these. But I think that that's something that, to round it all out though, with whether it's sales, research, owning your own company, I think the biggest thing is not being afraid to try, not being afraid to lean on your colleagues and have these resources here that can help. I mean, you don't want to dive off of a cliff and then say, oh, I forgot to call Jimmy to ask for help. You want to call Jimmy before you jump off the cliff so you can jump and have somebody to help cushion your fall if you do fall. But don't be afraid to do it. And I think a lot of us, if any of your families are like mine, my parents were always about being safe, taking an easy path, you know, nose to the grindstone, you know, work, get your little house in the suburbs, whatever. And that's not a bad thing either. But if you have goals of being, you know, Bob Johnson from BET or whatever it is in research, then you can't do that by not trying. You have to ultimately try. And I'm looking at these names on these on this list, and there's quite a few people here that I know that if you put your heads together, there's a lot of stuff that you've seen that could be beneficial to something you might be thinking about. And it could be something unrelated to research, like starting your own urgent care. It could be starting some tutorials or site training, or I mean, think about all the stuff that you've done and you didn't even think about it. Like when I first started Icon, somebody sat me down for about an hour and taught me how to book my flights and register for every mileage plan that they had on every airline, every hotel for points and rental car. That's nothing, but that's something. That's valuable information, a collector. How many of you have been on vacation using your points? But if somebody didn't tell you when you got hired to save your points, you would have never done it. And all of us probably have racked up points of traveling well before the pandemic. Now we lost our premier status, you know. But I think that it's we all have acquired a lot of information that can be good for other people, and don't be afraid to share it. Now, if you have a brilliant idea, like the next version of YouTube or something, don't share that with everybody, but you should definitely be willing to share certain things within reason to learn more about building your business, whatever that business might be.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Louis, for speaking with us. I think we've answered everyone's question. This has been great. I hope. Oh, Louis, tell everyone how they can contact you. What's the best way? LinkedIn, email.
Yeah, for right now, LinkedIn. And then if you send me a message and want to reach out to me, we can exchange emails and whatnot on LinkedIn. So yeah, I don't want to be cagey about it, but it's like I got a couple of email addresses and I got to figure out which one is best. But no, absolutely, LinkedIn would be the best place to catch me. And by all means, everybody, I don't know what level of where you are in the industry and what your goals are, but I'll be more than happy to discuss anything with you, because I'm a realist. What you talk about might very well help me, because I have a whole bunch of ideas. I'm just not telling everybody just yet. It's not the next YouTube though.
Okay. I always tell people if they want to go ahead and drop their LinkedIn URL, so that way, everyone on the call,
Yeah.
they can connect with one another. So if you guys want to, please feel free to drop your URL for your LinkedIn, so that way we can stay connected.
Okay.
And I'll just give people just time to drop their LinkedIn. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining. I'm just going to leave this up for a couple of minutes so everyone can drop their LinkedIn URL. Thank you. You have a great night.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Oh, Mister, that's my dad. No, Lewis.
Hey, Lewis, I'll be, my name is Jocelyn Ross. I'll be remiss without saying tonight that I'm an alum of the real HU, Howard University.
That's always one. There's all, you know what, man? Listen here. I will say this. That's good stuff, though. Listen, I'm telling you, my son is 17, and